Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Glenorchy Planning Authority on Monday, 6th of November 2023. I'm Beck Thomas, Mayor of Glenorchy and Chairperson of this afternoon's Planning Authority meeting. Joining me here in Council Chambers for this meeting is my fellow Planning Authority members, Alderman Stephen King, Alderman Jan Dunsby, Alderman Josh Cockshut and Alderman Russell Yaxley. And we also have our planning officers, our planning staff joining us today and other members of council staff, and welcome to members of the public joining us in the public gallery today as well, and hello to those of you joining our live stream. I acknowledge that we meet today on the land of the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, and we acknowledge the Muwinina people as the traditional owners and continuing custodians of the land on which we meet, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. The Planning Authority intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993. The Planning Authority has full power to make planning decisions on behalf of the Council. Our meeting procedures today are fairly simple. Our planning officer will present their assessment of the application and recommendation and then answer any questions of Planning Authority members. I, as chairperson, will then invite the applicant and any interested parties to address the meeting, and speakers will be limited to 5 minutes. I may then ask the planning officer to comment on any of the matters raised by the applicant or representatives. The Planning Authority will then discuss the application. For statutory planning applications, the Planning Authority decides the application and our senior statutory planner will explain appeal rights. And for planning scheme amendments, we don't have any tonight, but the strategic planner explains the decisions being made by the Planning Authority and the Tasmanian Planning Commission with respect to that application. Legal requirements are when deciding an application, the Planning Authority is required by law to seek to further the sustainable development objectives of the Act, consider the representations received during the public notification period, and make the decision by reference to the current planning scheme provisions. Meeting rules are fairly simple. We just ask that everybody please complies with any directions given by myself as chair of the meeting, and please respect other people's views and their right to have their say. So we've covered off on item 1, which is Planning Authority Declaration. Item 2 is apologies or leave of absence. We have none this afternoon. Pecuniary interest. Do any members of the Planning Authority or staff wish to declare any interest this afternoon?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you.
Item 5, sorry, I would need to declare interest in it.
Okay, item 5, we will note that and have a form to you to complete.
Thank you.
Any other interests? No. All right, well, item 4, confirmation of minutes. Do I have someone to move that the minutes of the Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting held on 2nd of October 2023 be confirmed? Moved Alderman Cockshut, seconded Alderman King. I had to check myself then going, was it really October? Yes, it was. It's November.
Is it really November?
Yeah. Alderman King. Any discussion of the minutes, Alderman Cockshut?
No discussion. Good minutes, Mayor.
Any other discussion? Happy for me to put the vote? Motion to the vote. I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you are for. That's carried unanimously. And Alderman King will leave the meeting at 3:36 p.m. Moving on to item 5, proposed use and development, multiple dwellings, 1 existing and 2 proposed, at 36 Grove Road, Glenorchy. And our planning officer is Peter Coney. So over to you, Peter, to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We have the first slide. The proposal is for 2 additional dwellings to be constructed at the rear of the existing house at 36 Grove Road. The dwellings are effectively identical, being 3 bedrooms, 2-storey, have balcony facing to the northwest. The existing dwelling is having modest alterations to the windows, private open spaces being focused within the frontage. The site will have a total of 4 car parking spaces in the open, and each dwelling will have its own garage. If we go to the next slide, please. Yep. So as you can see, they're fairly identical. This is the elevation as viewable from 34 Grove Road, and looking at it from the northeast, you can sort of see how one's stacked behind the other. If we go to the next slide, please. You can see the balconies. This is as viewable from 38 Grove Road. The dwellings are separated by the internal driveway, and then looking at it from the southwest, again being directly in front of each other, you only see the one. Site and locality, it's on the southern side of Grove Road. This area is a bit of a mix of residential developments. There's some industrial developments to the west. You can see a bit of Mackay's timber there to the south, separated by Humphreys Rivulet, and way down in the southeast is a bit of KG5. When we go to the zoning application of zones in the vicinity, you can fairly well get an understanding of why there's the disparate development types, because they align with the zone types in the vicinity. If we move to the next slide, please. The proposal had 6 items of consideration under discretion, being what you can break up, I suppose, into development standards and assessments under the codes. For the development standards is setback and building envelope owed to the proximity to the southeast boundary, site coverage and private open space, which is owed to the sub 24 metres squared balconies. Privacy for all dwellings relates to the separation of the windows and the internal driveway. Car parking numbers relates to the absence of a visitor car parking space. Sensitive use within an attenuation area is owed to proximity to Mackay's timber, which is an attenuating activity, and the flood-prone areas code standard for buildings and works within a flood-prone hazard area. So moving through, you can see in my markup here at the southeast elevation where I've shown a blue polygon for the amount of the dwellings which protrudes outside the building envelope as viewable from 34 Grove Road. In assessing the proposal against the performance criteria, which I've put there on the left, the dwelling separation under B is fairly consistent, but the issue that I took with the proposal was the visual impacts caused by the apparent scale, bulk and proportions of the dwelling when viewed from an adjoining property. That polygon protrudes outside the envelope about 1.6 metres. A lot of that height is owed to the fact that in addressing the flood-prone areas code, they've lifted all the floor levels, so the buildings have become taller. Though that in some circumstances would alleviate one issue of flooding, it then introduces another issue of the offsite impacts. So I wasn't satisfied that when you've got a design as that is, which is a rather bulky, plain sort of a cladding, there's no effort that's been made to make the roofs more interesting, to apply windows, different materials viewable from the property. I view it that there is an unreasonable loss of impact because it
Sorry, can I just ask you to pause for a moment? Sorry, Mr. Rolfe, we actually have to leave the door open, so Luke, can I just ask you to ask them to keep the noise down, please, out there? Oh, unless they've just gone. Thank you. Sorry, Peter.
No, that's okay, thank you. Essentially, the dwellings don't make an attempt to fit in better despite their protrusion from the envelope. It's a pretty blunt sort of a thing, how they stick out, and I don't see that it complies with the performance criteria. So for that reason, it doesn't meet the standard. If we move on, you can see here, I've done a bit of an overlay with the adjoining property 34. So that elevation we saw where you could see the blue polygon is what the person at number 34 would be seeing. There is some screening vegetation, and if you just kind of find where the 2 units are and the 2 yellow lines I've drawn, if we go to the next slide, you can then see there's that large screening vegetation which somewhat screens the unit 2, but then if we go to the next slide, you can see what's present from that person's yard and what, as I've marked up, would be apparent when viewable from within their property. So again, it's going to be quite visually prominent, and in many circumstances when people do different roof shapes or they tilt buildings, they can make them work, but this will be a 2-storey block. So as I said, I don't believe that it complies with the performance criteria. If we move on, the site coverage and private open space for all dwellings is a rather simple one. The balcony doesn't quite have a 4-metre horizontal dimension, but I am satisfied that otherwise it would provide enough space for people to have a reasonably comfortable outdoor enjoyment, linkages with the living, with the big sliding doors and that sort of a thing. And so I was satisfied that it did comply with this standard. Moving to the next one, I've circled where the lower floor, bedroom 1 windows, they don't quite meet the acceptable solution because they're set back 2.4 metres or thereabouts from the edge of the shared driveway. The performance criteria talks to requiring screening or being otherwise designed. I am satisfied that vegetative screening and the distance is enough that it can comply with that standard. And so it does comply, and that's it for the development standards under the zone. The other discretionary considerations are sort of the things that we've deferred to our engineers and to our environmental health officer. One being the car parking numbers, the absence of a visitor space. The proponent is reliant on on-street parking. Council's engineer has determined that that's acceptable, as often is the case for a 1 parking shortfall for visitor spaces. The flood-prone hazard areas code is something that the development engineers also considered, but I'll get to that in a moment. The other standard under the codes is the attenuation code, sensitive use within an attenuation area. The proponent provided a particulate emissions report, which said that there was no likelihood that they would be adversely impacted by particulate emissions from Mackay's timber, and equally an acoustic report, which determined that there was no issue. And so the environmental health officer determined that it complied with those standards. For the flooding, again, we sent the proposal to the senior civil engineer, and we all spent quite a lot of time on that one, and for reasons I'll get into shortly, we determined that the proposal did not comply with that standard. So if we go to the next one, this definition is not in the flood-prone areas hazard code. It's at the front end of the planning scheme. It's a term which is used for a lot of the codes relating to risk, being landslide and that sort of a thing. And so it's very important that we bear in mind what this definition is asking us to look at when we're looking at whether something is a tolerable risk. It's a defined term, so we don't get to go and think about the ordinary meaning of what's tolerable or not. And without reading it out loud, really, it's about finding whether things can be managed to secure the benefits of a development, but finding the lowest level of likely risk. So bearing that definition in mind, if we move to the next slide, we can see that much of Grove Road is within a flood-prone hazard area overlay, which has been applied in the mapping under the local provisions schedule. If we go to the next one, please. I was afraid this would happen where it's a bit small, but when a development is within that overlay, all buildings and works need to meet the performance criteria. There is no acceptable solution. There are a number of things, and the applicant has provided a flood hazard report, but in short, what was found through that flood hazard report was that the hazard rating for the site is H3, and that is a rating which is unsafe for children, elderly, and can cause an issue for vehicle movement due to the velocity of the flows. So we have to look at whether the development can achieve and maintain a tolerable risk as defined, having regard to the development, which is mostly the bricks and mortar type things under P11, but then under P12, we've got a flood hazard report also demonstrates that the buildings and works don't contribute to flooding on the site or on adjacent land, which we're satisfied it doesn't, but that it can achieve and maintain a tolerable risk from a 1% AEP event for the intended life of the use without requiring flood protection measures. So there's a sort of a crossover of bricks and mortar, which the flood hazard report said, yes, this building can withstand flood forces, but then there's also this question of to what end is it appropriate to have the bricks and mortar when we consider what's going in the bricks and mortar, which is people. And so the flood hazard report coming to a conclusion that it's unsafe for children, the elderly, and for vehicles, myself and the development engineer and the senior civil engineer all came to the conclusion that we can't determine that that's a tolerable risk because it's houses for people, and we can't put houses in places that are unsafe for children, the elderly, and vehicles. This is a drawing which is supplied by the flood hazard report, which shows the different hazard levels. I won't tread on the engineer's toes too much, but I think one thing that's important is where you look at that sort of khaki colour, that's where the driveway is going. The flood hazard report in some instances suggests, and certainly through speaking with the applicant, that in a flood event the people can stay inside, and that may well be okay, but we can't control that. If a person was to decide that actually they would leave, where they would leave through is the H3. So that's the unsafe part. They don't have an exit point somewhere else. I think that that's a critical issue. Insofar as the other matters, I'd ask if you were to have questions that we've got Bree online and we've also got Patrick, and you could direct your questions to them. I'll just continue through the rest of the report. So we referred it to the development engineer, senior civil engineer, the environmental health officer, waste services, and Tas Water. And effectively, out of those referrals, what we got back was that it complied with everything except for the flood hazard code. And if we move on, the proposal was advertised for the statutory 14-day period. Now, in my report, I said there was 3 and 1, but it was 4 and a 5th. And so I apologise for that, but you did get all of the representations in your attachments to consider. So for those 2 where there was opposition, the matters related to privacy, boundary fencing, landscaping, and visual bulk. Of the representations in support, they made mention of the benefits of new residential development in the area, and the one which was received outside of time, which we still consider, was talking of the lack of available on-street parking. Next, please. So, though the proposal complies with a number of the standards through the acceptable solution or the performance criteria as I've outlined, the proposal does, however, fail to comply with the clause relating to setback and building envelope and the clause relating to buildings and works within a flood-prone hazard area. For that reason, if we go to the next slide, you'll see that I've got a fairly clear recommendation that the proposal be refused for reasons that the proposal fails to comply with either the acceptable solution or performance criteria of clause 942 setback and building envelope for all dwellings, and the proposal fails to comply with either the acceptable solution or the performance criteria of clause C1261 buildings and works within a flood-prone hazard area, which is an applicable standard. So without concluding, I suppose, whilst I'm done, but if you have any questions, Bree and Patrick are available.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. Any questions from Planning Authority members at this time?
Yeah, through you. Yeah, I do have a number of questions just regarding the flooding side of things. There seems to be, it appears to be there's a clear conflict between the definition of the tolerable risk from the report to what the council has presented. So my question is in the attachments on page of the report, in the attachments on page 30, they've defined a tolerable risk there, saying that they've indicated that obviously the location is deemed hazardous for vehicles and children. But effectively they've said that it passes the tolerable risk, from what I can understand. Is that correct? And is that, where are we?
So this is, through you, Chair, 4.1 of their hazard report.
Yep.
Yes, you're correct that they've used the language of the scheme to say tolerable risk. The location is hazardous for vehicles, children, and the elderly, and escape paths are obstructed. and then they've gone on to a recommendation that the buildings be able to withstand hydrodynamic forces. I suppose that gap is what we are finding is the problem. That yes, they have a building that's certainly robust enough to be able to withstand hydrodynamic forces. And as I said in my report, anecdotally, their suggestion is that, well, if people stay within the building and the building doesn't wash away, then that's fine. However, we are not accepting of that because we can't always guarantee if there's a flood event at 4 o'clock in the morning, people see equipment or vehicles or things moving around that they might not act irrationally. And so for that reason, we're not willing to accept that it is a tolerable risk. So this, I suppose it's a point of contention, really.
Yeah. So in terms of the report, you would say that that's incorrect? So that's what we're basing it on?
I would say that they haven't particularly addressed the fact that though there's a robust building, there are people inside the building. They've said that there's an unacceptable, they have said that it's hazardous, unsafe for vehicles, children and the elderly, but then they have said that the structures can be suitably built.
Yeah.
And so then it's okay. In my mind, there's a gap in the one statement and their recommendation.
So it talks about how it's recommended that all structures undertake a hydrostatic, I have no clue what they are. I won't profess to. That analysis to ensure suitability, is that something that should be done at this stage, or should that be done if it goes, should it be subject, if this was to be approved?
Yep.
Should that be part of the recommendation that happens?
As part of the assessment, the architectural drawings showed quite substantial piers and that. So I would figure that the bricks and mortar side of it has been dealt with by the architectural drawings.
Okay.
What hasn't been dealt with is where tolerable risk and where the performance criteria talk about maintaining a tolerable risk for the life of the use and development, that hasn't been addressed by a suitably robust building.
Yeah. Okay.
Any further questions, Alderman Jackson?
I'll leave it open for other questions, but can I come back to one of them?
Yeah, absolutely. Alderman Dunsby, any questions?
I think just at the moment, thank you.
Alderman Cockshott?
I'm all good at the moment, thank you.
I further to Alderman Yaxley's question, I guess that, we're considering, yes, okay, I hear what you're saying, that the difference between bricks and mortar might be able to sustain flooding, but people could be endangered by that. There is currently a building on site, so was this tolerable risk not identified at the time I think by looking at it, it's been there for a fairly long time.
Yep.
Did these standards not apply then, or how do we accept that there is a current building on site that houses people, and that's okay, but we can't have more people on the site?
Sure. Well, I'll answer it briefly, and perhaps if Trevor has further things to add, if you wouldn't mind, he might add something. But if we go back a couple of slides, to that one. So the existing dwelling is quite close to the road. Certainly these standards and this modelling and all that sort of a thing didn't exist at the time that dwelling was built, which I would make to be late 40s. The existing occupants arguably could get out anyway because they don't have to cross through that H3, which is on the driveway. But even still, the point of it is that it's an existing building, we can't look at it. There was some discussion about, well, it's already hazardous and this doesn't make it worse, but I don't think that means you should necessarily double down on what may not be ideal by introducing another 2 dwellings. We might want to live with the risk we have and not increase it. Trevor, do you have anything further to add?
Did you want to add something? Yeah.
I have one thing. So if you look at this picture, the existing dwelling has the purple color, which indicates the hazard to be H1. And the definition of H1 is generally safe for people. vehicles and buildings, so the existing one is okay, within this flood.
Okay, thank you.
The
Trevor?
only thing I was going to add through the chair is that the sophisticated modelling that we have here is really something we've only had for probably the last
Yeah.
10, 15 years. Certainly when those original houses were built in Grove Road, we didn't have any information like this. There might have been some historical information that there'd been flooding from Humphreys Rivulet, but certainly nothing that would enable this sort of assessment to occur.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Yaxley, do you have further questions?
Yeah, just a question regarding H3 applications in the past or in the last. I know you're probably not going to be able to answer this question. Have we rejected other applications based on this type of report, based on the H3 side of things? Because we've got a lot of H1 around there, which we said that was obviously acceptable for people. That's correct. So I guess are we looking back at other applications? Are there any other applications that have gone ahead based upon having a H3 risk?
I have no idea.
No idea.
Sorry.
I know.
No, I didn't. I assessed this one.
Yeah.
Through the chair, in my time with council, which was a bit over 3 years, I can't recall any multiple unit developments where we've had a H3 as an issue. While we've had flood hazard management codes within planning schemes for a number of years, the modelling, and particularly this sort of sophisticated modelling, is something I think we've only had for a shorter period of time. It may be 5 years or 8 years. The manager of infrastructure may be able to clarify when we had the modelling, but it's not something we've had for a long time, and I can't recall the previous application
Yeah,
where we've had this level of hazard and we've recommended approval.
It's my first experience of it as well.
yeah, thank you, thank
I
you.
will add there as well that we have required other developers to make substantial changes to move outside of the H3 area before.
Okay, yeah. Patrick, did you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say, yeah, that's correct. Our CBD flood modelling with these hazard bands only came in 2019. I've been at council since 2019 and I'm not aware of any multiple dwelling units that have been recommended with a H3 hazard code.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
No, not at this stage. I know I've got
Okay.
limited time, but
No, that's all right,
just to
that's
be able to
okay.
process, sorry.
Yep, no, that's okay, no problem. We do have I don't think we have the applicant here, but we do have some representatives. Would you like to address the authority, Mr. or Mrs. Alford? Yeah, please come forward and take a seat. Yes, thank you.
Hi. I'm Grant Wolford, 38 Grove Road. I did put a section in mainly based on the fact that they are two-storey dwellings with balconies that look into our backyard. So our major concern is privacy, and that is, I guess, our number one priority is our own privacy, and those balconies do look directly into our backyard. The other issue was the proposal to take down a concrete wall between us and the neighbour at 36, which includes a wall for a garage, which has a garage on the other side of it. So it is a common wall, which provides us with a sort of a microclimate, if you like, if we do grow some exotic plants. But it seems silly to me that we are knocking down a brick wall to put up a timber one, which has a limited lifespan, compared to one that has a fairly permanent lifespan. And the other issue, of course, was the landscaping with the proposal to plant things which grow to something like 11 metres. So it may not necessarily affect us at 38, but certainly at 34. There is a shadow effect. We have had information from number 42 that the units that were built at the back of number 44 is the worst thing that's ever happened because they get no sun in the afternoon at all. So there are three major issues for us, I suppose, is one, privacy is a major issue. Secondly, the removal of a brick or concrete fence. with a timber fence to take its place, and also the height of the landscaping arrangements.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
And of course, in relation to the parking issues, we are aware, or you should be aware, that Grove Road has become a very busy throughway between Elwick Road and Main Road. Cars frequently get their side windows knocked off because parking on both sides of the street becomes quite a narrow throughway. So trucks and buses and whatever can make it quite difficult. So extra parking, if they've got to park on the street, it's going to make it even worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions?
No questions, no comments, but
So you nothing further to add? Team over there? No? Okay, well, we do have a recommendation that the application for the multiple dwellings, residential of 36 Grove Road, Glenorchy, be refused for the following reasons. One, the proposal fails to comply with the acceptable solution or performance criteria of clause 9.4.2 setback and building envelope for all dwellings, which is an applicable standard. And two, the proposal fails to comply with the acceptable solution or the performance criteria of clause C12.6.1, building works within a flood-prone hazard area, which is an applicable standard. Do I have someone to move this as a motion? Moved Alderman Dunsby, someone to second? Alderman Cockshut, Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. I'd like to express my appreciation to the council officer for the report. We don't take easily refusing an opportunity for housing, but I believe that the risks and other areas that have been included in this report do set themselves up for this recommendation, and I will have to support it in the information that's been put before me. So thank you. I'll throw it open to other authority members for comment.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion? Alderman Cockshut.
thank you, Mayor. I just want to echo Alderman Dunsby's thoughts just there. Obviously, thanks to Peter and the team for putting together quite a detailed presentation and what we've heard today. The thing which really stuck out for me is what Peter said earlier in regards to, yes, the existing dwellings are risk with the H1, but if it goes to the H3, that's where we want to have that, hopefully touch wood and God forbid anything happens, but if we did go through with that, might be putting someone's life in potential danger. So that's kind of was the final straw for me. Disappointing we're not going to get the dwellings built, but you never know, there might be some adjustments which can be made, but I just echo we are still open for business and houses as a council, but unfortunately on this occasion with the items listed, it just wasn't able to be done. So,
Thank you, Alderman Cockshut. Alderman Yaxley.
Thank you, Mayor. I have concerns around, I can appreciate the recommendation for number one, and obviously with having to increase the base down the bottom, that was it, increase the height and has set that to fail for that performance criteria. So perhaps if it was a single dwelling, it might not have been an issue. My only concern is for recommendation number two, is that we've been provided a report that states that it should be accepted and that the flood risk, and while I appreciate that there's no mention of people, elderly children and the vehicle side, my concern is that we've got a report that is contrary to from what council has recommended to us. So I have a conflict based upon the evidence that's in front of me. So I don't have any evidence here that shows me that it's implied, but there's no real evidence that I can read and take to the bank, if that makes sense. Because the report shows me that the report that has been provided provides it to be a acceptable solution. So I am torn in this, and I don't know what to, because I feel like the questions haven't been answered to the best of my. So is it possible to vote separately on each of the recommendations?
No, because ultimately the recommendation is or the motion that we've moved and seconded is for refusal for those two reasons. So you could, could potentially move an amendment that we take out item 2, but then that would leave us, I imagine, open to potentially to issue if it was to get challenged in the planning tribunal, if we're not identifying that, or it could, I see what you're saying, could have the reverse effect too. But can I just pause you there and ask a question, clarifying question? So when you say the report doesn't identify that risk, on page 10 of the actual FLUSIA report, where it refers to tolerable risk, it does say the existing property at 36 Grove Road in Glenorchy is vulnerable to flooding since the area around is rated as having an H3 level of risk for a 1% AEP plus climate change event. This indicates that the location is deemed hazardous and unsafe for vehicles, children and elderly. Yep.
So then on page 31 and 32, their response from the report says in P1.2, the proposed development would achieve and maintain a tolerable risk of 1% if the construction material methodology were not susceptible to the hydrodynamic and hydrostatic floods forces. So it's saying it's okay.
It's saying it's okay for the building.
For the building.
But it's not saying anything about it's choosing to stay silent on whether it's safe for children or elderly.
But does it have to?
Well, if a developer is having a report commission, they may want to stay silent on that rather than saying it is unsafe. Potentially. Do you know what I mean?
Don't get me wrong, I'm very much trying to.
Yeah. Oh, I know, you're just seeking to understand. I totally, and I am too. So I think that's why this sort of discussion is helpful. So I'm not challenging you to try and argue with you. I'm challenging you to equally to try and understand.
Yeah.
And that's just to clarify that that's the case, that the subsequent report that you're referring to.
Because I'd like some evidence based on, and I appreciate that we can't necessarily, I think it talked about a flood management plan that wasn't provided. And I think maybe perhaps if a flood management plan was provided and this is what you do in an event of a flood, if you live here, this is what you do, that wasn't provided as part of it. Because that element gives some instruction to the elderly, children, for people living in those dwellings, knowing this is what I have to do in the event of a flood. If I rent this place, there it is there, that's the part of the management plan. And that wasn't provided in the proposal, was it?
No, is that right? That wasn't, nothing like that was provided.
No. It does talk about a flood management plan.
Through you, Chair, we didn't receive any flood management plan. We did speak with the proponent, including their consultant, on this matter, and there was a lot of verbal discussion about how people can stay within the building. And I expect if they were to provide a flood hazard management plan, that would be the bones of it. That their solution is that people remain indoors for the duration of the flood for however many hours it may be.
Yeah. But there's no clear instruction for that to happen, to protect.
Not within the documents that have been provided, and that does say the existing and future hazard of occupants will be subject to high hazard ratings and the risks associated. So that is giving some further acknowledgement, I guess, to the risks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I will speak to the report before going back to Alderman Dunsby to close debate. Thank you to my fellow authority members for the discussion and the questions. I think it's really important that we do have this level of scrutiny, particularly when we're refusing or looking at refusing an application. As Alderman Dunsby said, it's not a decision we take lightly to refuse or to approve applications, but really it's we are here wearing our planning authority member hats to assess applications and whether they meet the criteria outlined in the planning scheme. And I am quite satisfied from the explanation we've received from our planning officers this afternoon that this recommendation for refusal, the motion that we've moved and are debating, is the right decision to take. Always hard when we do have wearing our elected member hats, a goal of being open for business, as Alderman Cockshut said, and of increasing housing stock and density within our municipality, particularly in inner residential areas. It's hard to refuse applications, however, we cannot compromise safety of Glenorchy residents and people's and make decisions that may impact on people's safety and actual life. This flood modelling data that we have has been really useful information to have as a council to help inform these sorts of decisions, and I really appreciate having the flood modelling information to help us make these better decisions to ensure safety of residents, and that development is done in a suitable and sustainable way, which is really important for our city. So I'm happy to support the recommendation, but I appreciate the concerns raised. Thank officers for their efforts in getting to this point, and thank the representatives for their contributions as well. I know there was some in support of, as well as not in support of, and as you can see, we are quite torn on this one to some extent, but ultimately it does not meet the criteria on both of those levels, and I'm satisfied with the refusal. Back to you, Alderman Dunsby, to close the debate.
Thank you. As you've explained, this is an area where we understand the emotion and things that come with this, but we can't apply it. We have to apply the legislation as it is. So that's the conclusion that's been put to. I believe the recommendation is appropriate in this particular instance, and happy for it to go to the vote.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you are for. That is carried unanimously. And I will leave it to Grace to explain the appeal rights from here and the process from here.
Thank you, Chair. So the application has been decided by the Planning Authority. The decision is to refuse the application. The applicant and the representatives will be notified of the decision, and the applicant has 14 days to appeal the decision. If the decision is appealed, the representatives may join the appeal.
Thank you, Grace. And thank you, everybody. Thank you to our planning staff. Thank you to my fellow elected members. Thank you to members of the public who have joined us in the gallery and online this afternoon. We will declare the meeting closed at 4:15 p.m. See you next